I'm recording on everything, by the way. What's up, everyone? Thanks for being here. Thank you for your patience. We have overcome some major tech issues to get this recording going, but we're happy to be here. So yeah, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Shut Up.
Keep going.
I'm Sydnee Goodman,
I'm Kate Franklin.
and this is the podcast where we
We
explore
explore
our
our
internet
internet
curiosities.
curiosities.
We're usually not that anybody really cares about the technical know-hows of this, but usually we use Discord, and today we're using Google Meet, and it would appear that there is a little bit more latency between the two. So that's fun. But yeah, thanks everybody for being here. We are so excited. Well, I don't know. I think we're both like kind of defeated, if I'm being honest.
A little bit.
Kate had a meeting today. I'll let her go into what she feels like she wants to share. And I got a new desk, and with a new desk means new cable management. And I have spent almost 2 full days trying to get it in a place. And I finally today just had to say, fuck it. I'm just going to plug the things in and we'll go back and fix it later. So that's where I'm at.
Oh, because you're going to do like a whole system situation?
Well, I was just trying to keep it organized because I'm not known for like my cable management and like the organization of it. But and I did improve, but I'm like looking at it right now. It looks pretty messy still. I have to, keep it. I have these like little tubes to try and get the cables to be managed, but I also think I need to buy some longer cables.
Mm.
But anyways.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm probably not going to get too much into mine because I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share, but um, I'm producing a commercial, and let's just say the talent whose talent is keeping calm is not so calm. So that's been really interesting to navigate.
Yeah, production. I feel like productions in general, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've had to really, since getting into this line of work, I've really had to like stay on myself. Because I think that
Yeah.
there's just so many moving pieces, and like productions are just like everyone's stressed. And so people just like are not, this isn't my own experience. It feels like people just like aren't fully communicating or whatever it is that's missing. And you just are like,
Yeah.
but happy to report that I've never told anybody off on set or anything like that.
Oh,
So
that's good.
I am a functioning adult.
I haven't either, but I can't wait to someday for the
Yeah.
right person, the special that special someone.
I feel like they'll really have to earn it for me, but it is what it
Yeah.
is. Hopefully, I hope I never tell somebody off or explode. I'd be really sad.
Yeah. Have you ever done that? Have you ever freaked out on someone?
Oh, 100%. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like in a professional context?
Um, Not in a profession. I have to a certain extent, but it definitely wasn't full force. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Like, but have been a few times where it's like I'm so frustrated, and it's actually interesting because both times that it's happened have been as a result of me being a woman in the workforce, if that makes sense. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think in the field that I work in, and just being like the only woman in the room and feeling like really silenced because, or like my opinions weren't taken seriously because, like the blow up basically came as a result of frustration. So like both times kind of centered with me being in the room for being like an expert, whether it was because we were talking about the show that I wrote, produced, and hosted, or because nobody else in the room worked in gaming and I was the only one there. And then people would like ask for my opinion, and I said it, and then nobody listened until a dude either said, "Oh, we should listen to Sydnee," or they like gave this like floundering response and listened to him instead.
Yeah.
In both cases, I like stood up for myself, and I think that I did it like, I don't know that it came, hopefully it didn't come off as like freaking out, but I was like shaking. I was so frustrated, and then I left and cried in the bathroom after it was done. So,
You
the
know.
usual.
Yeah. I've cried in so many bathrooms. I feel like a bathroom's like main secondary purpose is for crying.
Yeah. Oh yeah, more tears than shits for sure. I feel like, yeah, I don't know. It's just like not to get too far into that stuff, but I feel like, I don't know, crying is just like a release and work
It's
is,
good to cry.
I agree. I think it's great to cry. I think it's important. Do we want to get to your topic?
Sure. Well, I think, is it on the thing? Well, it's not a surprise, but I'm doing the history of stand-up comedy. um which is ironic because I'm not feeling too funny today. I'm feeling very serious and dour. But maybe this will be the thing I need to get a little pep in my step.
Yeah, a little.
Um but so how I came up with doing this, it's kind of, I'll say upfront, it's not a full history. It's like as much as I could process and do for this podcast, which we know is not necessarily an academic text. um, so I just, pulled interesting things. It's not a full history. It's not even a full history of comedy, which I initially set out to do, but that was a too high of a bar to put myself at. Um, but I was mostly just curious that I didn't know when stand up started. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, that's probably been around for a long time. But then you think about it more and you're like, I actually don't know. I can't imagine someone in like the 1850s listening to a stand up comic. That seems like very weird,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I have a
So
guess.
then,
I'm curious. I don't want to say it, but I'm just gonna earmark that I have a guess on like where the inception was.
ooh,
I'm
interesting.
gonna
Okay.
write it on a post-it.
Um, And I watched this amazing movie that most people have probably seen. And if you haven't seen it, you absolutely should watch it, called The King of Comedy. Have you seen that movie, Sydney?
No, I remember when it came out though. I think I wrote it on my like
No, you
watch
didn't because
list.
you weren't alive.
Oh, never mind. Then I've definitely heard of it then.
It's from like I think it's like 85. It's with Robert De Niro. It's a Martin Scorsese movie.
Okay, that's why I've heard of it then.
And he plays a stand-up comic who takes a late night host hostage in order to be on the show.
Oh,
And
do you know why I've heard of
it's
it?
a Joker thing.
I
Yeah.
was just gonna say is because I remember reading all of the stuff for the Joker was King of Comedy. Yes, 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 yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Okay, this is why.
I hadn't seen it until like 2 days ago and I watched it and I was like, this is the best movie. You would really like it because it's like really, it has a very interesting take on the entertainment industry.
Ooh, I probably would
um
like it.
but that got me thinking. I was like, oh my god, when did stand-up comedy start? And so now we're gonna find out. So what is comedy? That's a great question. Me. um well, unsurprising, it's a form of drama, uh or other art which purpose is to amuse. I'm
Hmm.
sure we all know that. But it's obviously different than what a tragedy is, which is kind of, if you know the little masks, the comedy one is the one that's smiling and the tragedy one is the one that's frowning.
Are you calling up the masks?
No, I'm not calling them out. They're doing their job perfectly.
No, no, no. I said calling
Um
them up. You sent me B-roll.
oh yeah, you can pull them up. Yes, I totally forgot about that. So this is from ancient Greece. So that was their hot take on it, which they kind of started it. So, and I am going to say this is the history of Western stand up comedy. That's the only thing I got into. I'm going to say that up front. Again, I know that there's a whole other legacy in other countries and it's mostly America focused because we're Americans. Um, but the classical conception of comedy, which started in the fourth century in ancient Greece, fourth century BCE, so like long ass time ago.
Okay.
And it was concerned with humans as social beings rather than private persons. And its function was to be corrective, which I thought was really interesting, meaning that like the comic artist's purpose was to hold a mirror up to society to reflect its follies and vices in hope that they will be mended. So it was like a form of like public catharsis,
That's
basically.
interesting. It makes me think of, I took this class in college about it was a media like critique class or whatever on science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my professor said something about how like we as a society use science fiction as a way to examine our society as we move forward into the future. And so it
Yeah.
almost feels like the like mirror of comedy, because comedy seems like it's looking at kind of our current and past actions and critiquing it.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot about like psychology, like social psychology.
Interesting.
I think that's what, to summarize it more, I think that's what it's specifically saying is like, why do we act the way we do around other people? I mean, obviously comedy can happen in private, but that was the first reason for it. Um, and so this philosopher in the 20th century France, Henry Bergson,
That's such a
was
normal
writing.
name.
Henry
I feel
Bergson.
like sometimes like older, like it's like fourth century BCE feels like, I don't know, they'd have like really extravagant
Oh
names.
no, this guy's in the 20th
Oh,
century.
okay,
So
okay,
he's like
okay.
he's not like Augustus da 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 da.
Oh,
Like
okay. Got ahead of myself.
he's chilling. Well, I don't know. He might not be alive anymore. He might be chilling in the grave. Um
Wait, sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. This is the last time interrupting you in
okay.
this thought. Is that there was I was watching this TikTok and it started with this lady being like, if Leonardo da Vinci was still alive, he'd be the oldest man in history at the age of like 500 and something. And it's like, yeah, no shit, he'd be the oldest man in history if he was still
Wait,
alive.
what? She just meant in general?
Yeah, and that was like her like intro statement, like to talk about Leonardo da Vinci and how interesting he was. But I was like cackling, and I showed Alex and I was like, look how stupid, and he like didn't think it was that funny. I was like, but obviously he'd be the oldest man alive if he was still alive, but
Well,
he's not even close.
I hope that she was joking because that would be a really good joke. That shit
Right?
makes me laugh so hard.
I know. Okay, continue, sorry.
No, you're good. This 20th century French philosopher Henry Bergson he wrote about the theory of comedy, and he wrote about that comedy's purpose was corrective,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that laughter is intended to bring the comic character back into conformity with society, whose logic and conventions he abandons when, quote, he slackens in the attention that is due to life. um, we're gonna see that's not what comedy is necessarily anymore. Comedy is a lot about nonconformity these days, but that was kind of the initial conception of it. So I wrote a lot about ancient Greece comedy, but I feel like we kind of get it. Um, I will say that so the word comedy comes from the Greek verb meaning to revel,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it arose out of the rites of Dionysus, who is a god of vegetation, and like sometimes known as the god of partying or wine or something similar. I should know this, but and so it's interesting that the origin comedies are bound up with vegetation ritual, and it originated in phallic songs
Okay.
and was often improvised. So that I don't really know what that. I guess it means like that's why it's talking about like correcting like vices, like public vices. I think that's what that means. Does that make sense?
Uh, Minimally
Okay.
to me.
We're just going to move on from that because that's not really the point of this. So, comedy. Haha.
Comedy.
We know it. Okay.
You know
So,
it and love it.
uh in dealing with humans as social beings, all great comic artists have known that they are in the presence of a contradiction, that between the social being lacks an animal. whose behavior often accords very ill with the canons dictated by society. And so comedies classically always began with a low and base character seeking insignificant aims, but end up with an accomplishment that either lightens the initial baseness or reveals the insignificance of what they were seeking out to do. Um, and so this other English guy, people love writing about the theory of comedy. I'm sure I would if I was an academic. That'd be like a fun thing to
Yeah.
think about. This guy, William Hazlitt, wrote, quote, "Man is the only animal that laughs and weeps, for he is the only animal that is struck with the difference between what things are and what they ought to be." Which maybe that's not true, but I
It's
feel
very
like,
poetic.
but I love it. Like it sounds, I'm sure, like, don't animals cry? Like they have
Well, I feel
emotions,
like
but
dogs like like they like whimper.
yeah. But anyways, we love to hear it. So then, okay, so I was researching the history of comedy, and it went from ancient Greece to Shakespeare, and like kind of just like was like, that's the history of comedy. And I was like, wait a second, what about the court jester? Remember those from the medieval
That's
times?
what I wrote down.
Well, you're correct. Um, so it's very similar to what modern stand-up comedy is back then, basically. A court jester, a fool, or a joker was a member of a household of a nobleman or a monarch that was employed to entertain guests during the medieval and Renaissance eras. I'm sure everyone knows this, but the interesting thing is that there's this thing called a jester's privilege, and that is the right of a jester to talk and mock freely without being punished. But I wonder
So it's
how
like
much
free
that was held
speech.
up, because I feel like they often just killed people all the time back then. So, but the court jester, because of that, like he had a specific symbol and protection under the law. So
Mm.
technically, he was supposed to be protected. And this was kind of interesting to me. So apparently, Martin Luther, as of Lutheranism, used jest in many of his criticisms against the Catholic Church. In an introduction in one of his books, he calls himself a court gesture, and later invokes the gesture's privilege when saying that monks should break their chastity vows. So he was
Doesn't sound
kind of
very funny.
trolling, but like also like, I'm serious, guys. You should definitely do that.
Wait,
um,
so could you just declare yourself a jester, or was there a process of being like, you know how like you're knighted, like somebody else, it's kind of like someone outside of you has to say like, yes, you are
no, you have to be
this.
selected to be it. You can't just be like, I am now a jester.
Okay, okay, okay.
I mean, because like back in the day, like most people, if you weren't a nobleman, you were like basically enslaved.
Yeah.
You were bound to the land. So I'm not sure. I didn't research too much into gestures. I apologize because I felt like everyone kind of gets the vibe. But maybe that's something I don't know, like where they come from. Like if they're already in the nobility, I didn't look that up. I
Hmm.
want to assume probably yes. I don't think that they're like random serfs.
But
Um,
also, well, you definitely know way more about that stuff than I do, but in my head it's like the people working for nobility, aren't they usually common people, or are they kind of a class above serfs, like the handsmaiden, or like, like the
I don't know. I feel like serfs, I mean, this is getting into like the nuts and bolts of feudalism, but serfs were like bound to the land and they were really just supposed to like be farmers. And I think that those are actually, because that's so rough being bound to the land,
yeah.
that I think that like even those positions like in court, they had a higher status. Like that you had to be born into like a higher status,
Got it.
I believe,
Okay.
from my rough memory of going to the Tower of London. um, Speaking of London, let's go to Elizabethan England, where our
Mm.
boy William Shakespeare is working.
Well,
And let's also revisit 10th grade British literature, where we learned that in Shakespearean terms, the difference between comedy and tragedy is in a comedy, they get married in the end. In a tragedy, someone dies. We get that.
Easy peasy. I do think it's funny that marriage is comedic.
I know, it's like, haha, you stupid.
Suckers. Gotcha.
Well, I think that it's like it's not even, he kind of like rebranded comedy to not even be necessarily like the comedic. It was more just about like light,
The lack of death.
light. Yeah, a lack of death. Just anything that's not death. Even though I feel like comedy is always talking around the fact that we die, and that's what's
Immortality.
funny.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think some of my favorite comedies are Black comedies, but maybe that says something more about my sense of humor than anything.
Same. Um, but moving right ahead in history, we're now in 16th century Italy. And oh wait, I feel like I've just skipped over a shitload of pictures. What's the next picture after that?
Um,
Is
I-
it this?
it's the puppets.
Yes, throw them up. Because have you ever seen this? I feel like it's like in
I mean, I've
probably
seen this. I haven't like seen a performance because they kind of scare me. And this is a great
100%.
moment to let everybody know who's listening to our podcast that we have an image guide up on our Instagram. Instagram is shut up, keep going, all one word. And that's where we post kind of the photos that we're talking about right now.
Yeah. So you want to sign on to see this image of a Punch and Judy show, which started in 16th century Italy, but then really took root in England in like 1660s. And this basically was the start of, well, I want to go back because I feel like the Jester really, I didn't like find, I'm sure there's more I could have found about this, but it seems like the Jester is like the start of most comedy as we know it. Because I was gonna say that Punch and Judy, what I read is that this was the start of slapstick comedy,
Mm.
but I feel like the Jester has slapstick energy.
Well,
Don't you
does
think?
slapstick come from this? Because don't the puppets slap each other a lot?
Well, yeah, that's the point of them. So they literally like this is the start of like literally these puppets would just hit each other and everyone would laugh and it was really fun for everyone. And so the figure that became known as Mr. Punch made his first recorded appearance in England in 1662. And they were in the spirit of outrageous comedy, meaning that they provoked shocked laughter. Um, because they were dominated by this character, Mr. Punch, who's on the left here, and he just kind of beat the shit out of this woman, and everyone loved it. So, um,
Okay.
someone, uh, apparently, like this went really down really well with British audiences at the time because they were starved for like a sense of fun after pure like the terrible years of puritanism where like nothing was fun and it was all like wooden chairs and going to hell. um so the English audiences transformed Mr. Punch from a marionette into a hand puppet, and he basically started this like farce character that I feel like we still know, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah.
Um, and so then we're now moving into 19th century England, which is 1800 for people like me who hate that. Um, and the first mainstream clown came around named Joseph Grimaldi. And I don't have a picture of him, but he was super popular in the 1850s in music halls. And then people that followed in his tradition were someone that we all know, which is Mr. Charlie Chaplin, who got his start in these music hall sketches. And he gave a lot of Charlie Chaplin gave a lot of credit to this guy named Fred Carno, who I think I have a picture of, who developed a form of sketch comedy without dialogue in the 1890s. That's Fred Carno. And he basically started like
Like,
silent movie humor, but on the stage. And it's gone on to say, quote, Fred Carno didn't teach Charlie Chaplin um, all we know about comedy. He just taught us most of it. So he's the guy.
This guy's the guy?
And this guy's the guy.
Fred.
Honestly, like he's very instrumental. And he kind of started like vaudeville humor, which is where a lot of comedy came out of. Vaudeville, if people don't know, you should know. Vaudeville's awesome. It's like these shows people would go to that were like variety shows where people would sing and they would have comedy and they would have like other acts. I'm trying to think of what else was in vaudeville, but basically like the movie Chicago, vaudeville esque, great movie. And vaudeville is like really what invented movies. That's like where we got a lot of our conventions of early movies. So then, which then gave us Buster Keaton and the Marx Brothers. And I have a video of Buster Keaton, who's my personal favorite silent movie star. No offense, Charlie Chaplin, but I love him. He's so cute. This is when the house falls on him. We're watching a video on our stream, just orating. It's like, oh no. Buster Keaton is so cute. I love him.
I like the music. Oops.
Yeah, the organ.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're listening to the podcast, I guess something that you could look up. I don't know, what did you look up to find this?
Just look up Buster Keaton house. And it's like this famous thing. It's basically the famous comic gag that I feel like we've since used a lot, which is he's standing and the face of a house falls on him, but he survives miraculously through the window. Classic joke.
Classic.
We all love it.
Hilarious.
I have to say though, like, I love Charlie Chaplin a lot, but Buster Keaton, his like theatrics in his movies are crazy. If you're not into silent movies, I understand it's, it's a different form of media basically, but I highly recommend watching a Buster Keaton movie because they're all real, which is crazy. Like the stunts that this man does, he like literally like avoids trains like by driving cars past them. It's very exciting, and every time I show someone a Buster Keaton movie, they're always like, wow, he really did that. So Michael Bay could never, is what I'm saying.
I wonder, do you think he like always had really bad anxiety? It was like, this is the day that it goes terribly wrong, or what, like how do you even navigate the space of just like being immortal?
He's a weird guy. There's like a lot of stories about Buster Keaton that I can't really recall right now because my brain is not too limber, but
it makes me think of Buster Scruggs.
Yeah. Buster Scruggs. Well, kind of a different Buster.
But my dad's obsessed with Buster Scruggs, the Coen Brothers movie. He like makes everybody
surprising to me.
I know. He like loves it though. Like every time we're over, he's like, "Hey Sid, have you watched it?" I was like, "Dad, I've watched it with you like several times." He's like, so funny, and then he just like turns it on. He's like, "This one's my favorite because it's like a series of little vignettes."
Yeah.
And he's just like a very passionate Buster Scruggs. Like he's like preaching the good word.
I always think about that. Like sometimes I'll watch a movie that I feel like I should love, and I don't. And I'm like, that's really beautiful that every single movie that so this is someone's favorite movie.
Yeah, it is nice. That's a sweet way of looking at it.
Because I was like, because to me it should hit because I love the Coen brothers and I love Westerns, but something about, it didn't really do it for me. I do love the one with the Tom Waits as the gravedigger. That's the best one in my opinion.
I would agree that's the best one, but I also would say, but I wasn't surprised it didn't hit with me because I don't particularly enjoy Westerns, so
yeah,
it wasn't surprising, but
say lovey. A really good comedic Coen Brothers movies that not a lot of people love, but maybe I'll find out differently through the chat. Did you see Hail Caesar?
I think we saw it together, dude.
Wait, did we?
I think so, yeah.
Oh. I don't know if we did because I lived in San Francisco then.
Oh, I thought I saw it at a break.
Maybe I saw it twice because I'm crazy. Anyways, I love that movie. It's very funny.
It took me a second viewing.
Yeah.
It didn't connect with me the first time, and then the second time I was like, oh, I like this, but still not my like. It's not a standout for me.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's their best movie. I just think it flies under the radar. Um, and I find it a lot of fun. It's kind of my comfort movie for some reason. Like every time I have insomnia, I turn on Hail Caesar. I don't know why.
Interesting. I could see that.
Um,
Sure.
Probably because like I love like the golden age of Hollywood, so it's very comforting to me.
That does stand out to me. I feel like, yeah, no, I could see it. I don't know that it'd be, I don't know. I was thinking of what my comfort movie is. I think it just depends on what I need comforting for, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
Like
Yeah, I have several different ones.
It's like situational.
Yeah, any movie I bought on Amazon is like, I'm like, I might need to watch this on a sad night, which includes Emperor's New Groove.
Emperor's New Groove is a great movie.
Fucking rocks.
It's honestly like elite. I think that's an underrated movie.
For real. I think most people can agree. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best.
Have people not seen it?
I don't know. Some people haven't seen it.
I guess that's true. Every movie,
well, I don't know.
Some people haven't seen.
Yeah. Well, moving right ahead to our brief overview of the history of comedy. There was surreal humor. I'm not just doing the hits, but I do have a picture of the classic surreal humor, which is The Toilet, by Duchamp. This is famous. People know this is the start of the ready-made sculptures, which is the comedy comes from the fact that this urinal was on view at fancy art museums and he had a laugh at it. And I have seen it and have laughed. So accomplished. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. Funny guy.
And I feel like if you go to art school in the 21st century, like this is what everyone does. Everyone is just constantly putting some ironic thing, like household thing, and being like, this is my sculpture. My favorite art school story of all time. I don't know if people know, but I went to art school. I don't know if we've talked about that. Maybe.
I thought you were being sarcastic. We've absolutely talked about it.
Oh, we have? I don't know. I think I'm just talking because I was talking to someone the other day that I knew for a while, and they were like, oh, I didn't know you went to art school. And I was like, interesting. But did I tell you the story about when everyone critiqued a mound of dirt?
Yes, I have heard this, but do share.
I think I might have said this, but we were going around, we were having critique. Someone had like a child's dress that was, I don't know, like a little like girl, like frilly dress that was like hung up on the wall. And it was very in the style of this, like a ready-made, like, oh my God, like think of the connotations. And in front of it, there was this pile of dirt that was like really random because we were in school in San Francisco and there wasn't like dirt lying around everywhere. And so everyone thought it was part of the sculpture because like that was the only place it was in the room, was right in front of it. And so everyone just started, no one really knew what to do about the dress because it was like, okay, you're doing like a gothic horror thing. I don't know. So everyone turned their attention to the dirt, and everyone really was excited about talking about this mound of dirt. And I really thought I was in the Twilight Zone. I was like, this is what they make fun of art school about. I did not partake in the discussion of dirt. And then at the end, I just wanted to say that. At the end, during critique, you're not allowed to talk. You just have to listen. So then at the end, the professor turns back to the artist and she's like, I found it really interesting that you guys were really interested in this mound of dirt because actually that was just here.
Did you plan it or like?
She was like, but that is real. I'm going to consider that for future pieces of mine. And I was like, dear God.
I feel like if no one commented on my child's dress, I would just go with it. I'd be like, yes, this mound of dirt.
No, but I mean, I think that's what 100% she was talking about because the rest of us were like, okay, like I don't really know what you want me to do here. That's why my art school is now closed.
They closed?
Well, they kind of did, and then they like were like, just kidding. we just needed a lot of funding and we had to be dramatic and say we were closing so people would like donate. But now they're being merged with the University of San Francisco, which has caused a big stir because that's a religious school and my school was a crazy hedonistic, like people were constantly naked. Like I don't really know how that's going to go down, but and people are really mad about that, which I understand because you know, who knows how much that's going to play into the education. Okay, we don't need to get into any more of comedy history. We want to hear about how stand up started. Am
That's
I
what the
right?
people want to hear.
Well, so the advent of cinema happened, right? And like comedy really hit for people. People loved Charlie Chaplin, as we've already talked about. And so that really helped kind of propel the journey of comedy along into making new forms. But stand up actually was kind of around before that. Um there's some places online. I guess I'm saying this and I didn't give the reason why I'm saying this is that some people say that stand up comedy started in the 1950s, which is not true necessarily. Because one of the innovators of stand up comedy, so interesting, was Mark Twain because he would travel around giving comic lectures. And is that not
Oh,
what a stand up comedy routine is?
sure sounds like it.
And so people loved it. And then vaudeville happened. And we already talked about that, which was comedy was always a part of it because there was like comedic sketches and clowns and all that. But some performers, such as this man, Frank Fay, which I don't have a picture of, sorry,
Imagine
but
him.
he became known by like just like off the cuff banter directly with the audience when he was like emceeing the vaudeville shows, which makes a lot of sense. That seems like a natural way for that to come about. And one of the first documented usage of the term stand up came in 1911 in the magazine The Stage, describing a Miss Nellie Porter delivering, quote, a stand up's comic ditties in a chic and charming manner,
Ooh,
which I
chic.
love.
Charming.
um, because she performed a bunch of comedy songs but
Like
just not really stand up, but it
by way
was
of Weird Al. Like,
but kind of she was the
okay.
first Weird Al, Miss Nellie
Miss
Perrier.
Nelly.
So good for her. Um, but then what we know as stand up at today was really honed in the resorts of the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York
Hmm.
in the 1930s. And these were predominantly Jewish comedians of the so-called Borscht Belt that started this kind of brash monologue giving that about like the bossy mother-in-law and like the cucked husband and like just kind of ranting about modern life, and everyone loved it and we still do. And there's uh but the real guy who apparently, I don't know, like I am not an expert in this and I'm sure a lot of people have specific feelings because it doesn't seem like there's one start. It's just kind
Mm-hmm.
of like people were kind of doing it here and there. But what the thing that I read the most, which is the guy who really heralded modern stand-up comedy, was unsurprisingly Bob Hope, who was a very famous American entertainer. He was a British-born former vaudeville song and dance man, and he developed an rapid-fire style vaudeville MC routine. And then he started going on the radio, which makes a lot of sense in terms of stand-up comedy. And then when he wanted to come up with material for his weekly radio monologues and for military audiences, because he was really famous for traveling and entertaining the troops,
Mm-hmm.
he hired a team of writers to make jokes about the daily news and gossip and other current events, which sounds like basically late night shows. And this is like a super big development off those like guys who were working the circuit in the uh, Catskill Mountains that I talked about,
Mm-hmm.
because they had basically like the same joke that they would just repeat over and over again, and it was like just like it was basically like shocking. You would be like, "Oh, my wife's a real drag," and everyone would be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe he said about his wife in a public." You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
what their kind of thing was. But Bob Hope kind of expanded it and made it more about modern life at the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Um, so then stand up became a staple of modern life through the Ed Sullivan Show. Unsurprisingly, everyone knows what the Ed Sullivan Show was a huge American late night show that everyone watched. The Beatles were on it. Everyone freaked out. um, and then in the 1950s is really when like a wave of stand-up comedians came around. And it's probably because like the era was so conservative that having people go on TV and say really fun commentary about political leaders and popular culture, and like just basically being disrespectful when respect was like the only thing that people cared about back then. People loved it, which showed you that that was people were not actually people don't love that type of lifestyle that much. People need a release.
Yeah.
And stand-up comedy, like going and seeing it live, was super popular during the beat era, when comedians would go into small clubs and perform with like cool, smart, politically engaged people. um, and one of the most famous comedians of this era, who spawned a lot of uh, people who came in his wake, was a guy named Lenny Bruce, and I have a picture of him. I have a
Lenny.
picture of Bob Hope, but there's a picture. There he is. He became like a cult figure because he was really provocative.
I thought you were gonna say
He
perverted. I don't know
and
why.
perverted. He like would show up naked on things, like crazy shit.
I can see him
Like
having like
during
a really deep New York accent
yeah.
and just like slinging his dick around. I don't know why.
Um, he was not really accepted in mainstream show business because he was kind of a loose cannon. And he was always like, he constantly was being arrested for obscene materials in nightclubs. And honestly, it's really sad. Like, this all
Oh.
kind of culminated in him being in all these legal battles that kind of destroyed his career, really sadly. But
Mm.
and he ultimately died of a drug overdose in 1966. But as many people that died of drug overdoses in the 60s, he became a legend after that. And most stand-up comedians that came after use him as like their pillar.
Wow, he
One
really
of
took the
those,
fall.
I know, really sad. But I mean, that's the thing about comedians. They're like always have very tragic personal lives.
Yeah. Well, I think also just in general, the idea of like being an innovator is like
Yeah.
being ridiculed to varying extents, and kind of
Yeah.
paving way for the next generation to build on the legacy that like the walls that you're breaking down or whatever,
Yeah. It's a
or boundaries you're pushing.
it's a lonely life, honestly. Um well, a guy that I mean, and basically from then on, like modern stand-up is the way it is. There's one guy that I just want to talk about briefly because I heard one of his stand-up bits. And so okay, turning back a little bit, I've been listening to this podcast that I highly recommend. It's called 912, and it's about the aftermath of 9/11 on like
Mm,
American emotional life. It's really
interesting.
good. Um, and it's really like surprising. Like it covers topics that you wouldn't really think relate to 9/11, but they always come back, and it's
Like what's like
really
a
well done.
topic that like give me an example.
Well, they started going into the origin of the Onion, like the
The news.
comedic. Yeah, and because they basically had a really stellar run and they were just about to go like expand on they had this like expansion party on September 10th and then September 11th happened the next day and they like didn't really know what to do because they were like no one wants comedy anymore.
Yeah.
And their famous article that they ended up publishing was woman not knowing what to do bakes American flag cake. And everyone loved it. And like they got so much like support because people were like, honestly, I just needed like a laugh. Because
Yeah.
everyone was like, that's how I feel. I don't know what to do. So another one of those stories that was really interesting was about this comedian named George Carlin, who's a very famous stand-up comedy legend. And he became super successful in his early career for his parodies of television commercials and game shows. And by the end of the 60s, he like really latched on to the counterculture movement and like grew out his hair and was like super like edgy. And in one of his most famous routines, he had this thing called the 7 words you can never say on television. And he just said every bad word really, really fast, thinking that he would get away. And it spurred this whole lawsuit that he lost. And, anyways, there's a really interesting story about him on this podcast 912 because his daughter's on talking about he would record all of his routines and on September, I think it was again September 10th, it was like right before September 11th, he debuted this new routine he did about how much he loves disasters. Like he was like, I love
Oh no.
disasters. Like I think they're so like he's like, I don't want like 2 or 3 people to be killed. I want a tornado to come and wipe out a whole town. And like I am butchering it, but like you
The
can find it
timing.
online. And he delivered this thing and like it killed. Like everyone loved it. And then September 11th happened. And but the thing that was interesting that they talk about on the podcast is like people actually really it felt cathartic for people to listen to that, not immediately following 9/11, but since then, like that has been reemerged as like a very cathartic thing for people. And I was gonna have you play it, but I don't know if that's like a copyright thing. So go look it up. George Carlin tragedies. It's a crazy routine.
I'm gonna
It
write it
definitely made
down.
me laugh. And then following in his footsteps, or not following, they were working at the same time, was Richard Pryor, who is also a huge icon in the history of stand-up comedy. And he outgrew like a super youthful, I didn't know this, but he had like a super youthful, like clean cut television persona. And then in the early 70s, he was like, I'm gonna fucking do my thing. And he like went off and like gave really hard edged, racially charged, really amazing improvisational comedy that drew on like a cast of characters that he grew up with in Illinois. And he like is a super big deal if you don't know who Richard Pryor is. I'm sure everyone knows who Richard Pryor is, but if you don't, go on Google and look him up
So
because
I don't. I definitely
oh my
know
god,
of
look up
him,
Richard
but I'm
Pryor.
not like
He's
I don't know
very
why. Like
funny.
it's one of those things where it's like I definitely know he's like a famous person, but I know nothing about him. Like I didn't know he was associated with comedy.
Yeah, you should look up some of his routines. I'd be curious what you think. Um, but I don't know. I mean, from then on, it's like we get the last big like tent pole of stand up or I guess the last two. And this is obviously subjective. This is from the research I did. I'm sure there's like comedy people out there that are like, no, you're missing this, this, and this person. But Steve Martin was a huge
Oh, I've heard of
player in
him.
this because he was a television writer who then started this character impersonating the worst Showtime or show business person named a wild and crazy guy. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's very funny. You should look it up. Everyone should just be on Google during this, and because I'm not gonna like reenact it because I can't do it. But you'll have a good YouTube hole after this episode, hopefully. And then, of course, Jerry Seinfeld, who developed the observational style that a lot of comedians draw upon now. And someone I also want to mention, who is one of my favorite comedians of a few generations before us, is Joan Rivers. Have you ever watched Joan Rivers comedy, Sydney?
No, I haven't. I feel like my
You
only context for
should.
Joan
You would
Rivers
love her.
was her
She's
fashion
so
comedy
funny.
on E.
Yeah, well, that was my impression of her too,
Yeah.
until I like took a comedy class in college where we like went into all this. And I reacted the most warmly to Joan Rivers. I was like,
Oh,
holy
I'll have to
shit,
look
I
her
can't
up.
believe she's so funny.
I'll have to look her up.
And yeah, so that's kind of like a very, very vague and brief overview of stand-up comedy, but it's really interesting that it's such a recent thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like you would think it's been around forever. I have to say though that I went to an open mic recently and like people are really stretching the bears of what stand-up comedy is.
I thought you were gonna say you went up there.
No, I have done stand-up one time and it went terribly.
Really? I feel
Well,
like
actually, I did it
it
2
would go
times. I
pretty
had to
good.
do it in a class, and I killed in the class.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I can take this
To the next level.
to the next level. And so I went to an open mic. And well, granted, it was hard because it was an open mic, and the only people in the audience were like other people performing. And like, I came in, probably looked super green, and like was like, I can do this, is easy. And people probably that have been doing it for like years are like, shut up.
That's brave though. I appreciate that. I've been wanting to take either an improv class or an acting class. And
you should.
but the prospect of having to perform at the end, it's funny because I feel like I'm a performer for a living. But perform in like a different medium has stopped me. And then now I'm like, I want to wait until everything's fully open from COVID because I don't really want to do like a Zoom improv class. It sounds horrible.
This girl that I went to grad school with, she was like really into clowning. Like that was like her thing, which like is fine. Like sure. But she for some reason was under the impression that like everyone's really into clowning. And so she was constantly inviting people to clowning workshops, but like not in like you should come of like do you want to come with me? Well, she was also really rich, so she was like, I will buy you like a class, like a clown class. And I was like, I don't want to do clowning, I'm sorry.
I kind of want to try it just to see what happens. Like what's like a clown class like, you know?
I don't know. Have you been to the Bob Barker Marionette Theater?
No, marionettes creeps me out.
See, you would think same, but I went to it. I mean, this is pre-COVID, but it's like extremely wholesome and really entertaining. It's this marionette theater in LA. It's now in Highland Park. They used to be on my side of town, but it's very, it's like crazy how they do it.
I mean,
I've
like, seen really marionettes like puppets in action, if you want to call them puppets. Like I've seen marionettes in action and I'm like, that's impressive. But I'm also just like, please
like stop. Well, so she invited me to
the same woman as the clowning woman.
And I was like, oh, actually that's like, I would be down to go. That sounds really interesting. And so I went and I really enjoyed the show. It was like really fun. But then after, like they have like, they serve you like ice cream because it's like a lot of kids go, you know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
And they like come out with the marionettes and like talk to you, like they have like the marionettes talk to you, and it's mostly for the kids, right? But this girl I was with was like, the marionette was walking past, like going to another group of children, and she stopped in front of it and she was like, hi, my name is Bobo, like what is your name? And I was like, you're literally 27 years old, like. And then the guy who was doing it was like, yeah, okay. And then I was like, yeah, I gotta kind of steer clear from this. I gotta get out of here.
Oh, wow. So I was watching this episode of Curved. I don't know why it reminds me of this. But it's with this nanny, and it's in season 3, if that helps jog your memory. But it's like Larry David, we're talking about Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO Max. Larry David like goes to some kids party or whatever and bribes the nanny to let him use the bathroom inside and not like the bathroom
Mm-hmm.
outside, and he tells her like, oh well, if anything, like nothing's gonna happen, but if anything happens, like I'll take care of you, sort of a thing. Just kind of like bullshitting his way so that he could use the other bathroom. And then she ends up getting fired and like like makes it his problem basically. But she's like, it sounds like very similar energy to this woman where she's just a little like off her rocker, and she had worked at Universal Studios for 15 years in the Looney Tunes ride or something. And so like the Looney Tunes soundtrack like really sets her off.
Oh no.
It doesn't sound very funny, but I'm doing a poor job, but she had a very similar essence to the clowning woman, it sounds like,
I'm sure. I'm sure.
of the same
Yeah.
coin.
Yeah.
Well, sick. Thank you.
Well, that's the very unfunny history of stand-up comedy.
I really enjoy learning about that kind of stuff though, probably for the same reason that you looked it up, just because it's something that I feel like is all around us, but you just accept it as like, oh, this has always been here, and you don't realize like the evolution of how we got to here. And then it's fun to think about like how will this evolve and like what will spur from this and create something that like we don't know of or have a word for
Totally.
at this point, but will be maybe like very commonplace and revolutionary in like 30 years.
I know. I'm so curious what that will be.
Right.
Who knows?
I feel like if anything, it'd be like cyclic and we'd go back to like very physical, like almost silent comedies.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, like, I think you should leave hits different because it's just like so silly. And I feel like we don't have a lot of stuff like that anymore. That's just like pure silliness.
Totally. Well, and that I didn't realize how niche that is. I think maybe it shows that it's just like that's so my sense of humor, and clearly also like you enjoy it, and then like all of my other friends who are funny, like we all have the same sense of humor. Like my friend
Yeah.
Nick, like I feel like all of us are like, this is the best show I've ever seen, and like we quote it all the time, and it's just like literally the essence of every joke that I make. And then I was talking to somebody, I can't, maybe, it might have even been my brother, and I just assumed that everybody was as like hyped on this as I was, because you know I feel like the Netflix pipeline is there's certain Netflix shows that are just like in the cultural zeitgeist, and in the first like it like the Tiger King thing, or what was the other one, Squid
Mm-hmm.
Games. And so I assumed it was like maybe not at that level, but it was kind of, you know, everybody had heard of it when it came out and it was this big hit, and he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I was just like, oh. So I think it's just like a very niche little fun thing. So if you haven't watched I Think You Should Leave, it's literally the funniest thing I think that has come out in recent years. So good.
Yeah, but I have to say, I think going off that, like it kind of takes some getting used to. I remember when I first was shown it, I like was so confused and like didn't understand what was happening because because I feel like a lot of our humor now has come from like being really smart and punny and like relevant. Do you know what I mean? And it's not
Mm.
about just like something really absurd or silly.
But
I
I
had
think
to like get back there.
it's interesting because I think that I had a different experience where it almost felt like such a breath for me because I am really over smart comedy.
Same.
I mean,
I'm like,
I think there's a time and place, and at first it was like interesting to be able to have such like deep social critique through comedy, but at a certain point it's like, fuck you. Shut up.
I want a house to fall on Buster Keaton, but then he survives through the window. Like,
Exactly.
That's what I
Want. That's what I want. Well, cool, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry we missed last week's episode. We have jobs. I know that that sounds like you didn't know that we have jobs, but we do. That's kind of what happened, was we both just got really busy with work. But we're on it. So yeah, thank you everybody so much for listening. New episodes every Friday, which just feels funny to say since we didn't have a new episode last week, but it was an accident, everyone.
Most Fridays,
pretty much every Friday. Just assume it. Just assume that it's every Friday. And then most Mondays is when we do our live podcast recording over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/SidSoGood. And don't forget, this episode in particular, we had a lot of accompanying images. So if you want to check those out, Instagram, baby. Shut up, keep going, all one word. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Whoop.
Bye.